with the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. This session today in here is Trauma-Informed Practices for Working with Youth, and Dr. Shareem Hannigan Martinez is going to be our presenter. Um, Dr. Hannigan Martinez is an assistant professor of English education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Kentucky and a founding member of the People's Education Movement. So glad to have Dr. Hannigan Martinez here with us, and I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. A couple of housekeeping things. We are recording today's session, and it will be available later. Also, if you have just joined us, want to let you know you can access the chat and change your settings. The bottom right of your screen has a purple half oval button. Click on that, and you'll see a little button that looks like a chat bubble. So you can click on that and type in your name and your library. We'd love to hear what library you're coming from today. And then if you need to adjust your audio settings, you can do that in the bottom right too. Also, please note that you are muted, but you can use the chat feature. We welcome any questions and comments in the chat. And my wonderful colleague Charlie has just typed in the chat, we are providing live captioning, and you can access that in two ways, and she's just put that in the chat, those instructions. In addition, my other wonderful colleague Amy has provided a wealth of resources. All of the slides for today's presentations and yesterday's presentations and resources from the presenters are available at a Google Drive document. In addition, there are partner information resources in that Google Drive site. So without further ado, I want to welcome Dr. Hannigan Martinez, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. Do you mind if I share my slides on my end?
No, I don't mind at all. We can, I think let's do, and Charlie, help me if I'm not doing that right. So we'll share application screen.
Okay.
And do you know how to access that, Dr. Hannigan Martinez?
Yes.
So if you go to the bottom right-hand corner and click the purple button, and then share files. And Charlie, I see you coming on, so if I need to stop, I'll let you speak.
Nope, you're fine. I got it on just in case.
Okay, so go to do you see that screen, Dr. Hannigan Martinez, where you there's a little square that has an arrow coming out of it? And I see you're just coming back into the session, Dr. Hannigan Martinez. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I seem to have kicked out.
Okay. No, that's fine. Thank you for your patience. So if you go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a purple button. Mm-hmm. Click on that, and then there you will see a square with an arrow coming out of it. Once you click on that. And that's share content. You able to see that? All right.
Can everybody see that?
Right. Yes. Is that working okay for everybody? Yeah. Please feel free to type in the chat, or Charlie, let me know.
No, it looks fine. The only thing I was going to say is if you keep losing connection, it may be eating up too much bandwidth. We may have to go to the slides, but it looks good for now. So.
All right. Perfect. Let me go ahead and get started then. Thank you all for writing out those technological difficulties with me. Let me make sure. Can you all see when I switch slides?
Yes, it just did.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm very, very excited to share this work and be in community with you all. Again, my name is Shareem Hannigan Martinez. I am an assistant professor of English education at the University of Kentucky, and my work really explores the intersections of trauma and healing and love in our work with young people. And so a little bit of context for you all. I was born and raised on the San Diego-Tijuana border, which is a very highly militarized place with a lot of wealth inequality. And I was the daughter, am the daughter of immigrants. And what that meant for me as a young person was that I was often witnessing and experiencing a lot of the trauma that comes with living in really sort of inequitable conditions. And as a young person, for me, that manifested as a lot of anger and a lot of disengagement, where I didn't understand why we were experiencing certain things, but I knew that they didn't feel good in my body, that it made me very upset, that it made me sad, but that I didn't always have spaces to talk about it. And for me, this led me to disengage a lot with school. I felt like I would go to school and I didn't like what we were reading and I didn't like what we were talking about. And I felt like I was always getting in trouble. But for me, libraries were always a very, very safe space, right? They were my haven. And I say that to say, one, that I've been doing this work on trauma for a long, long time. And also that I am so excited to be able to share this work with the people who I think have been most responsible for creating the types of safe spaces that were so healing for me in my life. So thank you all for this space. So I want to start with a little bit of information about trauma. So when we look at the data on trauma, what we know is that right now, more than 50% of young people across the country have experienced at least one traumatic event or traumatic stressor. That 35% of them have experienced more than one. And in a pilot study done with middle schoolers in the Los Angeles Unified School District in California, they found that 98% of young people were saying that they had experienced at least one traumatic stressor. Right now, Kentucky ranks 45th out of 50th for being one of the worst states for child abuse, which is a form of child trauma. And at least 1 out of 5 young people are sharing that they have experienced a traumatic event in the last year. What's important to note about this data is that while it is incredibly, incredibly high, it is mostly dated before the global pandemic, before the sort of visible racial divide we have seen in the last few years. And these definitions do little to account for the ways that things like racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression actually constitute forms of trauma. And the way that they're coming up with these definitions is by defining trauma as the following: that trauma is when a person experiences, witnesses, or is confronted with an event or series of events that involve threatened death, serious injury, or that cause them to feel fear, helplessness, or horror. And they're all different types of trauma. And I'm going to move really quickly through this, but I think it's important because we are in a time where we're using the language of trauma really loosely. And I don't think that we can really develop trauma-informed practices without being very clear about the different ways that trauma exists. And so we have what is known as acute trauma. Those are experiences or situations that are emotionally painful and distressing, that cause folks to feel like they are powerless. This can be any sort of one incident. It could be losing somebody prematurely and unexpectedly. We have complex trauma, which is traumatic stressors that are interpersonal and prolonged, cumulative. Complex trauma most often accounts for things like domestic violence, child abuse, right? Forms of trauma that are ongoing. And corrosive, right? Things like social toxins, racial battle fatigue, microaggression, adverse childhood experiences, things that we know seem minute in the day-to-day, but that over a prolonged period of time actually contribute to the premature death of children and of folks of color and other folks who are experiencing these particular types of corrosive traumas. compassion fatigue, which I think is very important. And I heard the presenter before me alluding to this, that for a lot of us who do this work with young people, we experience vicarious and secondary trauma and burnout. And then we have historical and intergenerational trauma, trauma that's passed down from generation to generation. And we also pass down our trauma responses, and developmental, right, which is most often the type of trauma that we're talking about with young people. And I know that this is a lot of information, but again, I think this language is important because right now our understandings of trauma are still fairly new and narrow. And the reason that it's important to understand all of these is because the reality is that all of these are systemic and structural. And what I mean by systemic and structural is that we live in a society that has very much normalized these forms of trauma, particularly when we are thinking about the experiences of children. And so another way to think about trauma that I think is powerful and important is that trauma is a body's protective response to an event or a series of events that it perceives as potentially dangerous. And so what happens when we experience a traumatic event, when something causes us to feel fear, helplessness, horror over time or acutely, is that our brain, right, our body releases a ton of hormones to our brain. It's trying to get to our frontal cortex, the part of our brain where we are making sense of things, where we are trying to understand what is happening. But it releases so many hormones at the same time that a sort of traffic jam happens in our brain. And these hormones get stuck in our amygdala, what people refer to as our reptilian brain or our lizard brain. It's the part of our brain that is responsible for our survival and for our sort of most primitive responses. And those include things like fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. The reason it's important to understand these is because after an event, right? So we respond in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. If after an event we are not able to access our frontal cortex, if we're not able to come back to homeostasis, back to regulation, these become what we know as embedded traumas, right? They get stuck in our bodies and they start to manifest as post-traumatic stress disorder, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which again accounts for the fact that a lot of these traumas are ongoing. And when they become embedded, they start to manifest emotionally, cognitively, behaviorally, physically. Can lead to things like anger, low self-esteem, nightmares and reliving, a refusal to go to school, aggression, hyperarousal, which often gets confused with ADD and ADHD in the context of schooling. And so many of the behaviors that children are punished for, both in and outside of schools, right, in public spaces, so many of the behaviors that young people are punished for, arrested for, penalized for, pathologized for, are most often their body's way of making sense of trauma that they haven't had the resources or time to really, really heal from. And so what might this mean then for thinking about our work, for our work with young people, particularly within the context of libraries? What are the types of things that we should be considering? Most often when I speak to folks who do this type of work with young people, we think about trauma-informed practices specifically we use social emotional learning, mindfulness and meditation, de-escalation strategies and corners, and self-regulation strategies. And I think these are all really, really important and something that I want to come back to. But my work has actually taught me, right? So I've been working on trauma and healing with young people for the last 17 years. And what my research on trauma has actually indicated is that what we really, really need in order to make sure that trauma is not becoming embedded, not getting stuck in our bodies, is actually access to more loving relationships. That the more healthy, loving relationships children have, the more likely they are to recover and to thrive. That love actually serves as a protective barrier to trauma. And so when we're talking about love, we're not talking about love as something that is simply emotive, right? So not love as a feeling, right? Like, oh, I feel so cuddly and warm and love you. But love as a political praxis, right? Intention, action, reflection, of cultivating interdependence for the purpose of individual and collective survival, sustainability, well-being, wholeness, and joy. And we argue that love is practiced across 4 realms: intellectually, spiritually, tangibly, and emotionally. That we practice it in 4 directions: self, with peers, with community, and with the world. That it's made up of things like safety, honesty, vulnerability, care, trust. And that together those things make love, right? So love as the impetus, right? Why we do things, the process, how we do things, and then the outcome of the things that we are doing. And we really start and end with love, thinking about James Baldwin's letter to his nephew. And so James Baldwin in his letter to his nephew says, "Here you were, to be loved, baby, hard, at once and forever, to strengthen you against the loveless world. Remember that. I know how black it looks today for you. It looked bad that day too. Yes, we were trembling. We have not stopped trembling yet. But if we had not loved each other, none of us would have survived. And now you must survive because we love and for the sake of your children and your children's children." Right? Again, love as a very much as a response to trauma and as a manner of armor, of protection, of survival against what we understand now as a very loveless world. And so I want to share what those 4 realms look like, right? So we have the sort of tangible love. And folks argue that a tangible love is a form of material hope, and that the most important material hope that we can share with young people is access to really effective and loving adults who are really good at what they do and really committed to it. But I understand tangible love through the lens of my mom. Right? And so I told you all that I grew up on the border. And what this meant as an immigrant family growing up on the border is that our home was always the first stop for anybody who was migrating to this country. And as a young person, I would get really upset, right? Because my mom would say like, "Oh, this tío or this tía or this primo is gonna come stay with us." And I would be like, how do we have so much family that I never knew? Like, are they really my tío? Like, do they really have to stay here? And really, I just didn't want to have to share a bed with my sister. And my mom would sort of oscillate between going for her chancla, right, to tell me to be quiet, or right, telling me that we had this responsibility, right, because we had the privilege of space and safety, that we had this responsibility to make sure that the people we loved had a safe place to rest, to just be, to be fed, and to dream and envision what this might look like, or what their next steps might be. And so I wanted in my work to think about creating classrooms, creating library spaces, creating youth centers where young people feel like they are at home, where they have the material supports that they need, and where they feel safe enough to dream and to envision, right? So it really is this idea that they're not other people's children. How might we create spaces differently when we don't see the young people that we're working with as belonging to somebody else, but rather as our family, our nieces, our nephews, our children, our neighbors, the people who are going to help us raise our children? What might our investment look like? What might we structure the spaces that we're in, the resources that we provide differently when we see them as integral to our lives and as an essential part of the ecosystem that we are also a part of? The second is an emotional love, and it's really based on the Mayan poem In Lakesh, right? That you are my other me. And so how do we create spaces for young people to radically heal, to be able to, and I heard again the presenter before me talking about this in the context of grief, which I think is so deeply tied to trauma and healing. But how do we create spaces for young people to be able to share their stories, right? To know that their stories, their experiences are safe, are valued, right? So that they may start to heal from it. And how do we create spaces where we're not the only providers of that for children or for young people, right? But that we're actually creating spaces for them to do that with one another. And usually this means that we have to create opportunities for them to unite on the basis of recognizing similar community struggles, recognizing common social oppression, and what otherwise would be divisive conditions, right? How do we create spaces for young people to recognize the similarities that they share with one another and to see each other as necessary for their collective well-being? The third is an intellectual love. And I think about this as, how do we create culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogies and safe spaces? Right. So how are we making sure that all of the servicing that we provide, all of the programming that we provide, all of these opportunities for young people are rich in their cultural context, in their cultural histories, and again, culture not simply as race and ethnicity, right, but culture as a sense of belonging. Right, that could be cultural based on their age, based on the geographic region, based on the town, based on race, based on ethnicity, based on language, based on hobbies, right? But how are we creating spaces where young people's cultures are deeply, deeply valued, and where they are still getting all of the things that they need in order to be really successful in and out of the context of the work that we're doing with them? And the last is the spiritual love. And folks are often like, what do you mean by that? So I want to be very clear that when we're talking about a spiritual love, that we're talking about it as a different kind and way of knowing, that it aims to expand perception, to become conscious, to become aware of the interconnectedness between all things. And really, again, it's about interconnectedness. How are we creating opportunities to see ourselves as deeply connected to each other, to the place where we are, to land, and to ancestors? It is about making sure that we know that we are connected to something that is bigger than ourselves, right? That we are deeply valued, that we are necessary, and that type of being seen, being valued is instrumental in the process of protecting us from trauma and also in healing. And so these four sort of realms are, again, how we understand and practice love, and love not as a motive, but love as healing, love as part of our survival and part of our health and well-being, and literally contributing to the longevity of our lives. And I want to think about what this might look like, particularly in the context of the work that happens in libraries. And so part of it, part of the sort of thinking that I am having around this, and I want to be in conversation with you all, so I'm going to move through this so we can do some Q&A and discussion, is what are the opportunities that we are creating in order to build community with young people, but also for them to build community with one another, right? So what are the types of programming that is happening, reading spaces, reading groups that we are co-creating with young people, and how are we allowing for young people to have agency and power and be the organizer of these spaces so that they're bringing other young people in to spaces where they can build community, feel safe, share? What are the events, workshops, programming provided? Who are the guests that we're inviting into the library? And how can they be opportunities to normalize storytelling, vulnerability, healing? Again, the presenter before me talked about this in the context of grief, but I think it's important for us to make sure that when we are thinking about programming, that we're centering trauma and healing, right? That we are prioritizing healing as a commitment, that we are bringing in folks who are deeply skilled at doing this work with young people, and that we are bringing folks who are talking about doing this work in the context of the type of trauma that young people are experiencing, right? So what does it mean then to make sure that we're bringing in people who are good at this, but also who are bringing folks of color who are good at this, immigrants who are good at this, queer and trans folks who are good at this, and who reflect the type of experiences that students or that young people are navigating? How does the physical space and the policies prioritize care and safety, and how are they trauma informed? So again, I think it's important to have physical spaces that include de-escalation corners, that include the types of fidget toys that young people need in order to self-regulate, to make sure that we are supporting them and accessing that. But the other thing about trauma that's really important is that most oftentimes the way that I know that I am safe with somebody is not based on how they treat me, but how I see them treat other people. And so when we're thinking about trauma, we're thinking about libraries, a lot of public spaces. We have to make sure that our policies prioritize care. How are we treating unhoused folks who come into the space? How are we treating folks who have mental health episodes in the context of the space? And are we treating them with care? Or are we simply using old strategies that are often carceral and cause harm? If so, how might the young people that are witnessing that feel about sharing in this space that isn't necessarily safe for everybody? And then next, how do the resources provided allow for young people to feel seen and valued? And I'm going to connect that to the next one around authors and books and our commitments. I think right now we are in this era of banned books. And I think about banned books a lot in the context of queer and trans students of color and children of color who are constantly being told that their lives, that their bodies, and that they do not matter, right? And so as folks who do this work with young people, particularly in the context of libraries and of books, what is our commitment to making sure that we're not contributing to the trauma of children by banning their books, by hiding their books, and instead making sure that those stories are centered, that they are reminded at every point, right, that they matter, that their stories matter, that people who look like them, people who are like them, people who they love matter and are safe in this space. And the last that I think is really important is that means we have to develop meaningful partnership with community organizations, that libraries are such an integral part of wraparound services, but that it's important for folks in libraries to also do this work alongside teachers, to do this work alongside organizations that provide material resources, to do this work alongside community organizations that prioritize mental health services, but that we also be discerning, right? That not all people who provide these services are necessarily doing it with the same commitment to trauma and healing, with the same type of lenses around trauma and healing. And so how do we build meaningful and intentional wraparound services that make sure that young people are being held, supported, deeply seen, and loved in every single space that they traverse, right? Because what this does also is that when we are in meaningful partnership, when we see that the onus is not simply on us, then we also develop more protective barriers for ourselves so that we don't develop the same burnout and vicarious trauma that pushes so many of us out of the work that we do with young people. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we don't have a ton of time and I want to spend 10 minutes being able to speak with you all. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and thank you all for letting me share. How do I stop
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hannigan Martinez. I want to, folks, if you've got questions, please do type them in the chat. That's the way we have got the interaction set up. So you are muted, but you can type questions in the chat if you'd like to share thoughts about what she has talked about, or she's obviously have books up on the screen, ideas about thoughts about banned books and working with youth, how you can partner with other organizations. Any ideas, please do type in the comments. And Dr. Hannigan Martinez, we are in Lexington, but can you, I was just thinking about some community organizations, because folks are all over the state, obviously, that they may want to share, or if you want to share of any organizations too that you can think of that may be good to, you could recommend to partner with. Or
Yeah, I'm fairly new to Lexington, so I am also still learning and eager to build community with folks. I can send in the resources some of the people I've started working with here in Lexington, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And folks, feel free to type in the chat any questions. It's interesting that this presentation and the previous one were talking about caring for one another, and when that previous was in the context of grief, but you're talking about loving and providing an environment that's welcoming and encouraging to young people. So it's,
yeah, I think I'm so grateful that I was able to to join in the first session. A lot of my work also deals with grief as part of healing from trauma. And so it was powerful to be able to be a part, or to listen to that session and get to hear some of the stuff that she was sharing, because I think you're right, it deeply, deeply aligns. I think where I really want to push the conversation on love, though, is again reminding folks that it's like not simply interpersonal and emotive, right? That it's not just I love you and you come in and we have this very deep and meaningful relationship, but that every single part of how we design spaces, institutions, programming, everything communicates who we love or don't, right? And every single part of it is about it has to be designed to prioritize loving relationships, again, with young people, between young people, with communities, but also like, how does this space support young people in loving themselves more? Because if they don't, right, then we are missing out on an opportunity to fortify the protective barrier that we know will help them heal.
oh, thank you. And you had mentioned too about you can see how somebody's going to love you and how they love others, and reflecting in policies. And so if you want to elaborate on that more, that's fine. Or if anybody wants to talk about how that impacted them, that statement, please feel free to do that in the chat.
This chat feels like a first period with ninth graders. I'm okay with, I've been there. I'm like, you never know. I'm like, sometimes I could talk the whole hour, but then there's so many questions after. Yeah, so I think because my push on, or my thinking around that, and what I'll elaborate on it, is that libraries are public institutions, and so they often respond in the way that public institutions do, right? Which is that most folks are trained that one of the first things we do is that we call the police, for example. And without getting sort of mired in the conversation around police, what we know factually is that the police don't make everybody feel safe. And that actually some folks feel very unsafe in the presence of police. And so that means that we have to rethink what our first steps are, right? I'm not saying don't call, I'm saying that shouldn't always be our first go-to. How do we have systems of de-escalation, of care, again, mental health folks and supports and organizations that we can call that can help us de-escalate situations, so that that's not always the thing that we do. Maslow says, right, that if the only tool you have is a hammer, then you tend to see every problem as a nail. And so I'm very interested in what it means to redesign policies and reimagine policies where we have more than just a hammer at our disposal.
Thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that. Interesting about the connection with Maslow, that you bring in that into that.
Yeah, and Maslow was actually one of the first people that led me to study love. Maslow says, right, that love is a precursor for self-actualization, right? That it's necessary to become actualized, to become the best version of ourselves. But Maslow actually developed his hierarchy of needs, which so many of us use, by borrowing from the Blackfoot Nation. And what the Blackfoot Nation actually says is that self-actualization is not the pinnacle, that it's only a step on the process to community actualization. So again, right, this idea of love as being necessary to actualize myself, but that being part of the larger community and our collective well-being.
I don't know if you've seen Dorothy's question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll let you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Dorothy. Yeah, so spiritual love, a challenging topic to not exclude anyone. Yeah, so I think that we also can ask young people what it means to them. I think using nature as spiritual connection is important. So many of libraries and public spaces are situated in urban centers where we're disconnected from nature. And so it can look like programming, right? Like, what does it mean to, like, let's read outside? Like, what can we learn from the land? And so creating opportunities for young people to just be outside more, but to see themselves as part of the sort of ecosystem of being outside. And so I draw a lot on Indigenous folks for that. And it could be, right, what did you learn? What can you learn from the trees, right? How we have a lot of writing programming that happens in libraries. How can we write outside and create prompts that ask young people to think really deeply about the nature that they are in constant communion with? And then spiritual doesn't just have to be about land. In the classroom, for example, it can literally mean having authors on the wall. And for students of color, right, to have authors of color on the wall, to make sure that our posters are reminding folks that they are a part of a larger ecosystem, a larger community where they're going to be deeply seen and held and loved.
Thank you. Now that makes me think too about displaying. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'll let the posters. That's an interesting idea for folks to be able to see themselves.
Yeah, it's all the little that I feel like I'm saying this. It's all the little stuff, right? Everything we say and do communicates who we believe belongs to a space and who we love in that space. If I walk into your house and you have pictures on the wall, but none of the pictures are of me or of somebody who looks like me, that, right, I'm not going to feel particularly loved in your house, right? That the same is true in classrooms, the same is true in libraries, that we often have posters that don't reflect all of the people that we want to feel welcome there. And then we're surprised when they don't. Yes, Mary, absolutely, right? Displays, I think, are so powerful. I know so much about a space in a school library, in a public library, in a bookstore, about what people's commitments are based on the displays that they have out, what authors they're prioritizing to put out, what books are outwardly facing. It tells me so much about what people believe, who they value, and about whether or not I'll be safe in the space, whether my experience is going to be valued there. Book displays, I think, are incredibly, incredibly powerful and mean more than we sometimes realize. And I think that's particularly true in this moment, again, where children know that their books are being banned, right? That books written by people who look like them, that books written by people who have similar experiences to them, are being challenged and made illegal and hidden from them. And so to say, right, we're going to put these books out that reflect that, even in the face of all of this sort of controversy, like, that says something about how you feel about me, right? And what your commitments are to me.
Anybody else want to share in the chat? We've got plenty of time and plenty of space. And this is a good time to remind you too, if you all want to participate, my colleague Kim has created an online space for folks to participate and connect with each other called Miro, and I'm going to drop that information in the chat here for you. You can participate in that at lunch or if you need a break. So I'm going to just drop that in the chat there for you.
I know that we have a few more minutes, and again, I have so many other, I have stories, and I can pull up student videos and sort of share the impact. And I have other resources I can put in the sort of resource folder. But part of the reason I wanted to do Q&A is that I think that there are always so many people who are experts in the room, and that I don't want to discount that so many folks in this room are doing parts of this work daily. And I would love for you all to share in the chat how you have seen and or prioritize in the context of this work, so that we can grow and learn from each other how this might be more thoroughly done across different spaces. Oh, thank you, Mary. I actually think somebody just emailed me about participating with that Teen Band Book Club, which I'm very excited to do.
Is it okay?
Kaylin.
Is it okay if I provide your email address, or should I? Okay, I copied it from your slide earlier, but if I don't have it correctly, just correct me.
Yeah, I just put it in. I just put it in the chat. And absolutely open to connecting, to building, to supporting the work that you all do, which again has been so instrumental in my life and the work that I've done with children over the last few decades.
Well, that's encouraging to hear that libraries have made a difference. I mean, we hear that, but it's always nice to hear it. Just I mean, I'm sure in your profession too, in the education profession, to know you've made a difference.
I love taking kids to libraries. And my nephew says that his earliest memories of me are me forcing him to learn how to write his name at the library. And I think I was 17 years old, so I think I was clearly meant to be a teacher before I even knew it, because I don't know why that was my idea of fun, but we were at the library learning how to write from the time he was a little baby. Are there any other folks who would like to share in the chat how you all have done this work? I would love to learn from all of you.
Well, we certainly appreciate those who have shared, and if you do want to email later, we've provided that email address to any questions you may have or thoughts.
Yep, I know that it's lunchtime now, or folks have a break. I want to be mindful. Breaks are very important, especially when you're spending your day online.
Well, thank you very much on behalf of Amy and KDLA for presenting today, and for presenting all this information and being willing to engage in the conversation via the chat. So, and I think folks are able to now even connect with you since Mary's at the Lexington Public Library, so you're all are local. But thank you for being willing to share your email address and just for presenting on this topic. Thank you, Dr. Hannigan Martinez.
Yes.
So very much. And thank you, Charlie, for dropping in the game collaboration link. So, well, folks, if you don't have any other, you're welcome. If you don't have any other questions and so forth, you're welcome to take a break now. We will see you back in this room at noon for Possibilities Unleashed in Public Libraries.